Hi, my name is Hassan Tetteh. I'm Dr. Hassan Tetteh today, but that wasn't always the case. My story started a long time ago in Brooklyn, New York. I was born to West African immigrant parents, and I grew up in a neighborhood that we like to call the 90s. It was right at the intersection of Canarsie, East Flatbush, and Brownsville, just in the shadow of Brookdale Hospital, on a little street called 94th Street between Linden Boulevard and Avenue A. That neighborhood back then is a lot different than it is today. And during those years of growing up with strict West African immigrant parents, I had quite an experience of grit, of discipline, and a lot of love that I'm very grateful for. I grew up with some really great friends. We played ball, we played tag, we played basketball, Cocolivio, Skelly, all of these things that bonded us. And growing up in that time, there was definitely a lot of dreams that we had, but there was also a lot of challenges. And over those years of growing up with those friends of mine, I realized how lucky I am to be here today to talk about the journey I've had to become a doctor, because a lot of my friends did not really get out of that environment. We have friends of mine that never made it to see young adulthood because of some of the challenges that we had in those neighborhoods growing up. One of the things that I really remember growing up in the city, and especially in Brooklyn, was that you always had to have this instinct of survival, because it was so much different than it is now. And you always felt that when you were in your neighborhood and you were safe with your friends, things were good. But if you go outside your neighborhood, there were always things you had to watch out for, And so you always had to learn how to survive. And whether you're on the plane or you're on the train or you're driving around with your friends, you always had to watch your back. But those formative, difficult, challenging times, I think, gave me all of the tools and sort of these, elements, this foundation to be prepared for all the challenges I would face as I sort of went down this journey to become a doctor. So after undergrad, after graduating from Plattsburgh, biochem major, really, really hard at the time to get into med school. I was fortunate after many, many failures, many, many rejections. I got accepted to downstate medical school, which for me was a blessing because it brought me back to Brooklyn. And I got to come back home, and at the time my dad was sick, and he would ultimately pass away after I graduated from med school. My mom was a lot older at the time. She was also dealing with some health issues. So it was good to come back to Brooklyn ultimately. And those years of med school were real formative for me because I was living the dream. I was here in Brooklyn. I was back at home in my neighborhood. I was seeing some of my old friends, but I was actually trained to become a doctor, and it was just a few blocks away from where I grew up. So it was really a special time for me. And medical school was not easy. It was really challenging. And I really discovered sort of my full potential in medical school, not immediately, not in the middle, but somewhere toward the end. And I say that because when I first got to med school, it was, it was kind of like a dream to be there, to be in this environment where people were learning to become physicians and dreaming about, fulfilling a childhood dream of theirs. And in my case, it was one that my parents really had for me, but it was one that I started to embrace. But in those second and third and sort of the last years of medical school, it's really when I started to appreciate that if I worked harder, if I really dedicated and put the time in, I would get better grades, I would become more experienced, and I would have a lot more ability to understand this wealth of information that we were learning. And I would start to impress upon my professors and my instructors that, not only was I capable of doing this work, but I could actually do well and I could excel. And by the time it was the third year and the fourth year, I was convinced absolutely that I was going to be a surgeon, and I wanted to be a surgeon, and I had that passion to be a surgeon.